Okay. Gotta get the little lice eggs out.
Ew.
Still bizarre something that. Alright, you guys ready?
Yeah.
Cool, awesome. Please feel free to film everything and anything you want. It's good to document it so you always have this. There's a lot of information going to be said and all that. And sometimes, once that brain starts to fade, then we forget what we did first thing in the day. And if you've taken a class with me before, you know it's just full on. So let's document this. So we're going to start with the more solid side. So what I was explaining earlier was the fact that we're going to be using profile sectioning. So we're going to be working literally vertical sections in the back, and as that crosses through into the crown, that vertical becomes horizontal. So we're going to use this pattern of sectioning all the way through. So when we look at the profile, we'll see that they're actually curved. So we're actually going to be cutting both dimensions within the haircut. Very kind of clean all the way through. And it's going to be the over direction that we use that's actually going to create that shape that gets heavier towards the front. So haircutting can be quite simple, or it can be quite difficult based on how it's explained to you and how it's taught. And you know, a lot of us tend to think that there's loads and loads and loads and loads of things. There's actually a limited amount of things that you can do. It's just figuring out how to control those things. Haircutting is the distribution of weight. So weight is two things basically. It's either skinny or it's the opposite to skinny. It's big, right? So and whenever we cut hair, that's all we're doing. We're making something skinnier or we're making it bigger, or we're just leaving it alone. Remember, you can either keep weight, build weight, or remove it. So in this instance, we're going to be removing the weight, but we're going to be pushing it around in certain places. So haircutting is the distribution of weight. Right? Those things called elevation and over direction and finger angle, they control the distribution of weight within the haircut. Whether it gets heavier towards the front, whether it gets heavier towards the back, whether it gets heavier towards the top, or whether it gets heavier towards the bottom, right? Now, to do all that, it's really simple. You pull away from what you want to keep. That's haircutting. It's literally pull away from what you want to keep. So I'm going to use direction to pull away from what I want to keep. And while I'm using direction to pull away from what I want to keep, I'm going to be using finger angle as well to pull away from what I want to keep against that head shape. So that's as simple as it can be. What makes it difficult is getting it from here to the hands, obviously. And that's just practice. So we'll start with the more solid outline. So in this first panel here, I can literally create my length now if I want to. I don't need to take a ton of sections here. All I need is consistency. And if I'm working on a finer texture of hair, and I start taking smaller sections to establish my length, if there's any form of kind of movement here, then I'm not really playing a good game with that. I'm kind of working against myself. See, when people wear their hair, you have to think about what they do when they wear it. It's worn down most of the time. That's the whole point of doing it, right? Unless you're having a lazy moment or you're at home and it's up, right? But it's worn down. So if I come through with small sections and try to establish this length, if there's any form of cowlick in the hairline, then it's going to jump and explode on me. But in reality, this person's not going to comb all this up and just leave that one section down, are they? So when we focus too much on this, that's when things can go wrong. We need that density down there. See, that's going to be more of a realistic situation, how that person's going to wear their hair. So unless they're like, oh yeah, I need to just wear this bit down for work and all this up, then I'm not going to cut it that way. I'm going to work smarter, not harder. Right? So the whole thing is to simplify what we're doing. So if I take numerous sections, I'm allowing myself to make more mistakes in the haircut. Whereas if I downsize that to just the one section, and I have a lot of that weight pushing that hairline down like it will, then I feel much better about creating that length than doing it with a smaller section. So whatever you're doing creatively, it's always classic. That never ends. So I'm just combing this piece down. And we're going to go with a much more solid outline on this side. Just working those edges. So now I've got the length. It's all about protecting that. So it's been a minute since you guys have been here. You were here last year, you guys. Now, if you've taken a class with me, you know about protecting the outline. If we want to keep this, then there's something in here that we need to use to give us a guide so that we can protect that hairline all the way through. See, when I turn this around, guys, look how much lower the hairline in the back is compared to the front. So literally there's half the hair missing in this area. So this has all the hair, and we just started there. And we started there because we want to get heavier towards the front. We want to start in the shorter place and get heavier. But as we transition through, all of a sudden half the hair's gone. So if we're not careful when we layer this, we might lose too much weight through here. And if we do that, that length jumps up, right? It can look cool, right? And when we do the rounder shape, we're going to want that to happen. We're going to want some face framing. But in this haircut, we want to fill this area in. So when we look at the hairline right here, see, if I extend that backwards, that's actually the occipital ridge. So that tells me that if I want to protect this through here, I'm going to have to use the length that's created in that place as my guide. Now, we have to talk about how to approach this. We're going to take vertical sections. It's not a stationary guideline yet. It's going to travel. So that means the size of the section is very important to begin with. As soon as you start using a stationary guideline, that's when those sections can start to get much bigger, because you're bringing it to one place. Now, we have to think about how are we going to actually cut this? How are we going to approach it? Stay. So we've got our length in. We're going to use the length at the occipital ridge, because the length at the occipital ridge is going to be the length through here. So we want to protect. So I got to think now, do I want to cut this on the outside of my fingers Do I want to cut this on the inside of my fingers? And where do I want to stand when I do this? See, every one of those things is going to affect how I cut this. See, if I cut on the outside of my fingers, my outside of my fingers curve that way, right? So I can always manage to cut curvature. Also, look at what happens when I move my cutting hand. It creates that curvature. That's what happens, the natural swing of my arm, without me thinking about it. So I've got to put myself in a place where I don't need to be thinking about it, where it's going to be like autopilot, second nature, whatever, instinct, right? See, if I come and stand over here, my fingertips are pointing up now. So my scissors are going to come from a completely different place. Up here now. Down onto this. So now all of a sudden, I have a tendency to cut this shorter and leave that longer. And 9 times out of 10, that's what's going to happen. So think about what I said earlier. Haircutting is the distribution of weight. Weight has 2 sides. It's got a skinny side and it's got a bigger side. So layers, that's a removal of weight. So if the word weight's in there, that means there's 2 forms. There's a skinny layer and there's a big layer. Right? So let's go to technical names now. You guys heard of convex? You heard of concave? One's skinny, one's big. That's all it is. So I've got to figure out here, what kind of layering do I want here? Do I want a skinny concave or do I want the bigger convex? So that's like when you've got to figure that out. How much weight do I want to remove? How much movement do I want? If I cut a Christmas tree, which is concave, right? Where's the weight? All on the bottom. So do we get anything up here? No. There's no hair there to do that. So when I cut my layer, I've got this choice. I've got concave, convex. So rounded, or just cut through that. So do I want liposuction? Or do I want to add some volume and some bevel in there? Is there a bouncy blow dry involved here? Or do I just want it to stay kind of stuck? Those are my 2 options. Concave is a very strong, aggressive way of layering. It literally takes the guts out, right? Convex leaves part of those guts in there, right? So one's got more swell to it than the other one does. One's going to blow dry different to the other one. One's going to move differently to the other one. So always remember that, weight, skinny or big, right? And it's the same with graduation. Do we want a skinny graduation or do we want a bigger graduation? One length is one length. That's keeping the weight. You're not altering it, right? Keep, build, remove. So I have to think about all of those aspects. So if I want to cut more weight out of the haircut, then I'll probably use the inside of my fingers. It's flatter, right? I'm not that 1 in 100 people where they curve the other way, right? My fingers curve that way. So when I cut on the inside, I tend to be able to cut a much flatter line and remove more weight. So it's always knowing what your tendencies are based on how you're going to approach it, because one thing will do different to the other. So my preferred position in here, guys, is to work on the outside of the fingers. So I can always pull away from my outline and I can create that curvature. So I can leave some weight within those layers. So there is some bounce there afterwards. Now, if I wanted something more restricted, less movement, then I would come and cut more of a concave layer. How are we doing? We all right? Yeah? Cool. So this is my preferred position. Fingertips pointed down. And we've established the length, right? There it is. So all I'm going to do is create my layer over the top of it. So I'm using the length that's at the occipital ridge as the guide. Now, section number 2, I've got to think about what's happening this way. How heavy is it going to get towards the front? So within this particular kind of pattern that I like to use, I could over-direct everything into the middle. That's the most amount of over-direction. That's always a good one to try first. See if you like it. If it's too heavy, you go back through and you don't over-direct as much. Right? So that's what we're going to go with. We're going to send everything into number 1. Section number 1, get rid of it. Oh, sorry. Bring everything to number 1. Brain. So my body position. I'm stood over here and I'm literally parallel to what I'm doing. My shoulders match the guide. If my shoulders turn, then I turn and move the hair somewhere else. So whatever my feet are doing, they're going to stay parallel. I'm always going to have the opportunity to twist the upper part of my body all the time, right? And we do that to get comfortable, right? Like, I don't like that, listen. You know what I mean? Literally, you have to stay super robotic in this. And it's sending everything into the middle and keeping these facing that section angle, or the direction of the section, excuse me. Very important to do that. Everything gone into that middle. So now, what I'm seeing is I'm seeing less density in this back area. So before, it would have been more like so. One length thick all the way through. And layers, all that's done is it's beveled this through. So if we would have done a concave, this would come up even higher, alright? So it's all based on how much weight you want to remove. You've got to be the judge of that, right? Hair cutting is not one size fits all. It can't be cookie cut, right? You can do the same haircut cookie cut on like 10 people and it probably looks good on 6 and it doesn't look great on 4 of them, you know what I mean? So again, it's understanding where it's going to fall. So what I want you guys to do is to go back to your mannequin now. We're going to start on the left side of the mannequin. We're going to establish the length first. I cut it right about this area. And I cut it in my fingers. I cut it in my fingers because there's no shoulder blades. Alright? It's easier when it's shorter to just use kind of the skin on the mannequin, but when it's longer, just pop it in your fingers. If I was doing this on a human, I would have had that rested. And even if I use my fingers, right on that back. Body position once your outline's done. Vertical sections, everything into the center. You're going to use the length that you see at the occipital ridge and you're going to slightly follow the head shape. So, this bit. Alright? Cool. Let's do that. Have fun.
Someone said